All right. So in this week's episode, we talk about stop playing defense. And in the episode, you'll learn all about what we mean by that. What I want to warn you, though, is at some point in this conversation, I kind of get lost in how deep the conversation is actually going to go. And I admit that I was unprepared for how scattered my brain was going to be in that moment as I saw on the horizon how many different directions we could go in. And I was, I guess I'll say, struggling to pull in or focus on one idea or the other. So yeah, just be prepared for that. There's going to be a lot in this conversation, and we're hoping that we inspire someone to make a change.
Yeah, so just continue listening to hear that full conversation.
So today, this topic that we're going to talk about is going to cover a few things, I believe. Off the top of my head, number one is going to talk about the importance of communication. Um, but I think where this idea came from maybe stems from Happy Wife, Happy Life. Right. I know we said we were probably going to bring this topic back up again. Um, and the idea that I started playing around with is as a husband playing defense, right? And not just living your life to uh live and serve. All right. The idea behind that I wrote down is as a husband, are you living your life focused on trying not to make your wife angry? And do you find yourself at times wanting to blame her for how you now feel you have to live? Like, are you trapped in that area? So I don't know, man. Let's have a conversation about this. Like off the rip, that statement or those questions, how does that strike you? How does it, what does that make you think of?
Well, now after I've seen this a couple times, I didn't realize the second question stemmed from the first.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's deep.
Yeah.
But because I think because I was stuck on, are you living your life focused on not trying to make your wife angry? And that is literally the defensive position, the reactive position. There's nothing proactive about living your life as a husband that way. Um, and really it can be mentally exhausting. Like just thinking, I'm just processing out loud. Like if you just feel as you're mentally exhausted all the time, but you feel like you have a handle on everything that's in your life, that might be something that you might want to consider, right? Like, because there's a that unconscious kind of weight of like considering, will this make her angry or not? But it might be so like it might be just the water you're swimming in, right? As a
Right.
fit, like you might just be that just me what you do, and but it's the fine line of being considerate for the
Yep.
person you love versus um not to be like just letting it go further, right? Because you always want to consider your spouse. But when it comes to not wanting to have it go negative, and that's why you're living your life, then you could get lost in that and not who you are and how you react to certain situations.
Yeah. And as you're saying that, there's always the other end of this as well, that there are things that we know are going to make our wife angry and we do them anyway.
Well,
I got a woman.
well down. Yeah, right.
uh, um, but yeah, so I feel like there are probably a lot of men who find themselves in this realm, right? Like there are things we want to do in life, right? Things we want to do day to day. And we might feel like, well, I probably shouldn't do that because she's going to get upset. And then I'm going to have to deal with the repercussions on the back end. Now, I feel like let's start talking about solutions to this, you know, theory I have. Number one, like I said in the beginning to open, is communication, right? If you have these conversations with your wife about, these are some of the things that I like to do. One of the best times for both of us for me to do these things. Um, it could also be brought up. What are some of the things that she would like to do? Because, right, some of the things that we do could prevent her from doing what she wants to do. If you set the parameters for your relationship for when these things are okay, it's like creating a budget,
Mm-hmm.
right? The budget gives you permission to spend, as they say. So these conversations give you permission to do what you want to do within the parameters of the budgeted time.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And this can fall onto other things, but this is just where my head is landed right now as far as like just, exercising different privileges, I guess, is the way I'll put it out there. Um, but yeah, do you have anything to add to that? I mean, having that conversation, how could that conversation go?
No, I think that would be a perfect way to start it, and then just be open to hearing what she has to say and really listen. Um, because ultimately you want to make it the point that you are understanding her, but also being able to clearly communicate what your needs and wants are.
Mhm.
But I so I thought about it a little bit differently too, as well. Not just the things that you want to do, that you may not do because it will make her angry. Like if are out of the house too much, or you golf too much, or you're hanging out with your friends too much. But I was also thinking about reactions to certain situations.
Mhm.
Um, so or even like maybe your expression of life, like say you're very loud and boisterous and all that. Um, but she might not like that. So then you begin to tone it down and tone it down. Then all of a sudden, like you're suppressing who you are in that way.
Yeah.
Um, and that could be pretty destructive if you don't address it too.
Yeah. I mean, it makes me think of that episode we did, Mayor or Not to Mayor, right?
Mm-hmm.
That that could be suppressing who you are. Like if you're outgoing and, a social butterfly and she's not, right? That makes her uncomfortable for some reason. Those are probably conversations you need to have. Um, man, you got me deep diving in my mind on this one right now.
You're
Because
welcome.
I'm wondering, like, do those two type of people end up together, right? Which
Mm.
I feel is a possibility.
Meaning the
Like the social butterfly and
oh,
you know, um, man, I feel unprepared to really dive into this conversation.
it's let me say this. What about so when we're considering go on the tangent of this. We want to consider our wives, right? And
Yes.
we don't want her to be affected negatively by our actions and vice versa. But if we live the life to on the defense, it can become unintentional manipulation, right? So let me explain what I mean. If you are considering her so much that you lose who you are, she is now dictating how things are going in your marriage based on your response to how you think she'll respond. So even if she isn't actively saying, I want you to do this way, this thing,
Mhm.
you knowing her are now going to be start to do the thing that way and that time. And that can get very tricky because it's now like I don't want her to be angry. I don't want to have this conversation. I don't want her, to pick me apart because I'm doing it this way. So I'm just going to do it how she wants. And then, 10, 20 years in, you're totally lost in anything that you want to do. And she's just kind of getting, quote unquote, getting her way
Mhm.
without any conversations or um any communication, right? But our point of our marriage and the point of this podcast is to communicate. But if you get so in the weeds of knowing how she's going to respond, you can halt all communication. Because let's say you start doing that and then what her expectations are change, but you've been doing it so long because you think her reaction is going to be a certain way that you don't even have that conversation. I don't even know if that made sense, but
I think it did. And what it made me think of is that this could spur the question, who's the leader of the household? Because I feel like if we really get into this and that's the way you're behaving in your marriage, you're basically acting as a submissive rather than an equal.
right.
So
Yeah.
so then what it brings out in my mind is your wife then desiring something that you're not giving to her, right? That household leadership or um, is I've got to imagine that if a woman has a husband behaving in this manner, that she may feel that she is lacking a man.
In the traditional sense of what our society says the role of a man should be.
Um, Maybe I will just better define it in how I was thinking about it.
Okay.
Lacking in the sense that her husband is unwilling to stand up to her, right? And basically just say how he's feeling, or if he feels like something needs to change, what those things are. And it's just because he doesn't want to have an argument.
Yeah. Yeah. I yeah, I mean it's not an equal partnership, right?
Mhm. That's what.
And no one wants to be like no one wants to hear my spouse is scared of me, right? Because there were things that need to be addressed in that space.
Right.
Um and if honestly, that's us taking the easy way out,
Hmm.
right? We're not there for the conversations, whether we don't feel equipped, we're there, we don't think they're productive, or we haven't had good experiences, whatever the excuse is, we're not here for it. But that is leaning into your marriage, leaning into those uncomfortable spaces. Um, so it's not really profitable overall for your marriage to live in the space of being on defense, right? Because good communication can basically solve anything, and that's what we need.
Yeah. And so let's think about it this way. What are you actually defending if you find yourself living life this way? A little dead air as we
Mm,
think about this
right.
idea, right? You're you're defending your your comfort, I guess.
Yep. Comfortability is what I was thinking. But that's really it,
All right. But how comfortable are you really?
right? Because you're not being fully
You're
yourself.
yeah, you're not living.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, if we really think about all that life has to offer and all that we can accomplish as a couple, right? Like there's as much as you might feel that it's the case that, well, really only one of us can have our way. That's not real. And it's only become real for you because you haven't had the conversations on how to make all of it work.
Yeah. That's that's not living. That's not your marriage to the fullness. If you're thinking singularly, I win, she wins, you're that's not the best perspective to have on marriage anyway.
Right.
So it has to be a we win. And with any decisions between two people, there's going to be give and take, right? There's going to be um, the best solution for us might not be my most desirable situation for me. But at the end of the day, if we're winning, you know, that is the best. So, but, and I think giving up, what are we defending, right? That question leads to the second part of what you had is, blaming her for how you would feel you have to live,
Mhm.
right? And the question is not just are you blaming her, but do you want to blame her,
Right.
right? Because it's really not a her issue, it's a me issue as husband in this situation.
Yep.
So that is classic deflection, right? Or sorry, classic projection,
There you go.
right? Like, oh, I have to do this because it's how she wants it. Can't believe she makes me feel this way. You haven't even had a conversation about how you feel. So she can't know that she's making you feel that way.
Mhm. She just knows she's getting her way.
Right. And for all that she knows is like you love doing that or acting that way or following that action because you haven't said otherwise. And
Mhm.
let's say the one thing my wife says, she checks in, but also says to other couples when we talk about things like this, she's like, the worst thing she that could happen to her in marriage is waking up or finding out that the amazingness that she thinks she has was all a lie. Like, meaning, like, I've been putting up this facade that everything is great in our marriage, but all the while harboring many things. And our marriage, to me, is not as amazing as she thinks it is. So, but that is quintessentially what can happen if we just are playing defense the whole time, because she thinks everything's great because, like you said, she's quote unquote getting her way, or it's just favorable for her choices or her preferences are being made. All the while, we have other choices, we have other preferences as husband. We might not even want to respond the way that we are because we know what the quote unquote backlash might be. So she thinks the marriage is one way, but you're living the marriage in a different way. And that is only destructive.
Wow. That takes it to a whole nother level. Like you're basically lying to your wife, pretending that you're happy in your marriage when, largely we're basically saying that you're not fulfilled, right? But so, day by day, month by month, year by year, you're living this way, allowing your wife to think that everything's fine is what you're basically saying that she is fearful of her, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And then at some point, right? And I'm not going to speculate what the breaking point might be, but at some point, just imagine there is this breaking point where all of this spills out 10, 15, 20 years into your marriage. Can you can you imagine the amount of deceit that your wife would feel in that moment? Like that could almost will almost be construed as, what's the word I'm searching for? Uh like almost an infidelity.
Yeah, it could feel that way,
That's what I'm saying.
especially if you're bringing receipts from like 10 years, down the road, like, or she's connected the dots, like, oh, this started 10 years ago, even though you're not saying it.
Mhm.
Like, yeah, that,
And now you want me to be responsible for it in this moment?
right. Agreed. And, you said something about, ultimately not being fulfilled in marriage, but, and I will say, and if we're taking that away, we're not even giving her the opportunity to like help us feel fulfilled if we're not telling her. So like, yeah, it's just it's not good.
Oh man.
Yeah.
I mean, so this really even goes back to men. Like, if you're struggling to communicate, learning how to do that. And if that means maybe going to see a counselor, this really stresses some of the importance of why we should do that as men, even if it's alone, right? Just to start that process and then maybe bring your wife in behind, um, to help learn how she best receives communications.
Hmm.
Um, this topic was a lot deeper than I really realized off the off the idea board.
Yeah. I mean, it is making me realize, or just reinforcing how important communication is, but also being comfortable to communicate, right?
Hmm.
Because if it seems, a lot of times when we're uncomfortable, we won't do that, but we want to. That's why seeing someone individually to help get those tools, we may not even just have the idea of how to start the conversation or how to ask a question or deflect or reflect on certain things that happen. If you talk to someone, they can give you those tools, and you and your wife may never have to go as a couple, if she's very good at communicating and you're not so much. Once you start having those tools, you'll get more comfortable, and then you might be good. You guys can just talk everything out. But also, if you're the communicator and she's not the communicator, um, then it might be a little more intense. Um, but I may be wrong because I'm not the more communicative in our marriage. But I feel
Mhm.
like if as husband you're the communicator, you probably aren't living in this defensive space. But I could be wrong, right? Because I would assume you're more comfortable in communicating how you feel. Um, but you could be in like the guess space on how she's going to react because she's not telling you. So then you're either trying to pull it out or guessing on the reaction, which isn't, I guess that's technically not defense, but I digress.
Man. So this was a lot in a little bit of time. And I hope that as jumbled as this conversation was, that y'all got some value out of it. Um, Even if there's just one listener who is inspired to go have a conversation, that's all we could really ask for. Um, if there was anything that we brought up that you'd like to talk about further, please don't be afraid to reach out to us uh, on Instagram. You can leave a message for us on the website, marriagestougher.com, or even just send a message on Facebook, searching Marriage is Tougher for Instagram and Facebook. Man, so I feel like this was a good conversation, and then maybe we should have it again and maybe break down specific details within this, right? But because we're up on time, we're unfortunately going to have to leave it here for now, unless there's anything else you'd like to add.
Nope, I'm good. We are up on time, so we can have deeper discussions at a later date.